everyone, thank you for joining. My name is Rabab, and today I want to take you behind the story and process of writing my article entitled Woven Hope: How Crafts Are Restoring Identity After ISIS. So, I am currently studying history and international relations at KCL. I'm in my final year and I'm looking to progress into the field of human rights law specifically. For me personally, this story began as something simply to do with an internship, but honestly, it grew into something where I was given the opportunity to talk about something way more personal to me that connected to my roots, my family, and my hopes for the future of my own homeland. So, in this episode, I hope to share with you how it started and what drew me to this topic, but also what I learned in the process of this internship. So, for some background context, I am half Iraqi and half Lebanese. Growing up, and even to this point, I'm much more in touch with my Lebanese side. And for me, Iraq has felt both close and also quite distant. For me, it was close because of the stories that my father shared with me, communication with my family back home, and also having Iraqi food. But it's also been very distant for me because of the fact that I've never been able to visit my own homeland. Because of the pain and conflict that has been shaping much of the country's landscape and the history in recent years. As we know, when ISIS came to power, a lot of people were affected, including my own family, as communities were falling apart and people were becoming displaced as a result of ISIS's brutality. And even from when I was a child, reading all these headlines to do with ISIS, I remember feeling very helpless and wondering how it would be possible for my country to rebuild after the rule of ISIS. And this question never really left me. It's actually something that lingered with me during my studies, and it's been a huge motivator for me in this internship and just with my degree in general. However, I remember reading about women in northern Iraq and how they started to rebuild Iraq after ISIS fell apart, and this was something that inspired me to write this article. So before we dive into the article itself, I think it's very important to understand what ISIS were and also what after ISIS meant for Iraq. So between 2014 and 2017, a group called the Islamic State seized control of large parts of northern Iraq and Iraq in general, but specifically areas like Mosul and Sinjar. So Iraq is a very diverse country. It's open and home to a lot of religious and ethnic communities. We have Sunnis, we have Shias, we have Christians, we have Turkmen, we have Yazidis, Kurds, and in those years, the Yazidi community, along with the Christians and Turkmen, was specifically targeted. And the goal of ISIS was to ensure an erasure of lives, but also an erasure of cultural and religious identity. So, as we know, thousands of people were killed, and thousands more were either kidnapped or enslaved. A lot of young women and girls were being unfortunately trafficked, and villages were destroyed. Furthermore, not only did ISIS cause brutality to the people, but they went around destroying sacred temples and destroying or looting cultural artifacts. So the preservation of culture began to fall apart essentially. And for the Yazidis, the acts of ISIS amounted to a genocide. It was not just an attempt to erase their lives, but also to erase their presence and their identity. And so when ISIS was finally defeated, a lot of Yazidis went back to their villages and their homes to find that everything they had spent years building was gone. Their homes had been transformed into piles of rubble, and the farmlands that they spent years cultivating and caring for were burnt. So the sense of community that these people had established over generations and the trust that they had amongst themselves was broken. And this was the world that these women that I centered my article on walked back into. However, instead of staying silent and accepting their fate, they actually began to rebuild, and they picked up simple items like needles and wool, things that had belonged to them long before ISIS, and they started to weave. For these women, it was not just about income, it was also about reclaiming the space and culture and also the memory that ISIS had tried to strip away from them. And that's why I felt like it was important to tell this story, because it shows that rebuilding is not just with physical bricks and cement, but it can also happen with very simple items like crafting items. So with this internship, I decided to choose it because I was very inspired by the focus on creative entrepreneurship for refugees and displaced community, and this is what spoke to me because of my interest in human rights and also the fact that I managed to combine human rights with storytelling. So the internship was about professional development for myself, but it was also an opportunity for me to write stories that do justice to people who are rebuilding from a grassroots level, especially women in communities that have been displaced or have been oppressed. So working with BizGs overall gave me the ability to kind of explore a bit more about human rights and also to learn that creativity can be a form of economic power which is what I hope to achieve and put forward in my article, that business and culture aren't separate but they can actually work together to restore dignity and identity. So before writing this article, I completed the Journalism Now Covering War and Conflict course, which changed the way I perceived storytelling, and it showed me that conflict reporting is not just about reporting on bombs or battles or statistical evidence. It's also about the people and the long journey that they go through during these conflicts and the aftermath. So the course also taught me how to protect sources, how to understand trauma, and how to write with a sense of respect and care, but also a sensitivity for these real life lived experiences. So when I wrote Woven Hope, I didn't want to just focus on victimhood, but I also wanted to show that resilience was undertaken by these women who are not just surviving, but they were creating and they were teaching and they were leading their communities in rebuilding their villages. So in the process, in writing the story, a lot of experiences and voices stayed with me. I heard about stories that honestly I had not read about before. So I feel like this article was crucial in teaching me or showing me experiences that I had not heard about previously. So for one woman, Kirti Hasso, she started a tailoring business after ISIS with just one simple sewing machine, and she experienced a lot of loss within her family. However, that simple sewing machine became the tool for her independence and for her to help others. It became a tool of financial stability, but also for her to reclaim her own agency and identity. For another woman called Mayasa who lived in Sinjar, she was illiterate. She was never taught how to read or write. However, she stated herself that when she learned how to work on weaving, she was determined to learn everything she could because the work itself helped her mentally and it gave her a reason to actually wake up and do something. So as we can see, the weaving is something that provides financial stability. It allows agency, but it also allows these survivors to come to terms with their trauma and to sit amongst themselves and talk in workshops where they all have similar lived experiences. And these are stories that stayed with me because it reminds me that healing is not just something which is dramatic, but it can also be a quiet routine that is shared amongst women through the form of creativity and art. As such, through these stories, I realized that rebuilding indeed happens in stages. The first one is crucial, it's survival. How do these women learn how to earn an income after being displaced or being widowed? How do they then find safety for themselves and their families? Then comes connection, their ability to essentially remember their culture and heritage while trying to find an income, while trying to re-establish their communities. And finally comes freedom, the ability to create and make choices again after ISIS had stripped this ability away from them. So for these women, for the Yazidi women, weaving encompassed all of that. It was a form of therapy, it was a form of livelihood, it was also a form of resistance for them. So it was an ability for the women to have control in a world that had once taken that away from them, and that is why I named the article Woven Hope. So this article means quite a lot to me, honestly, because of my own heritage, my own background, and my link to Iraq, but also the fact that I have never interacted with a Yazidi woman knowingly in real life. So I thought it would be very interesting for me to gain a bit more insight into their culture, into their heritage, and also to speak about a community that I feel like have not been spoken about much in the news. And as someone who grew up in diaspora, it was also a way for me to reconnect with Iraq beyond the headlines of conflict and pain. It was a way for me to see that Iraq has been rebuilding, and also to see that identity is something that is resilient. It can also be rewoven, as these women have demonstrated for us. It's also a reminder for me as to why I want to work in human rights. The stories that I've shared about these Yazidi women demonstrate to us that behind every policy and every headline, there are real people. These are stories that people have lived through. They are not just another headline. So, why does this story matter? Well, this story is not just about Iraq. It shows us that globally, people use creativity to heal from the traumas of conflict. In Rwanda, like I mentioned in my article, genocide survivors weave baskets. And then we have in Afghanistan, women are embroidering patterns that were once banned. So these are clearly acts that are universal, and it's a reminder that art and culture doesn't have to be something which is just associated with luxury. It's something which is a form of survival for many people across the world. So when we protect art and culture, we're also protecting the souls of these very communities who are working so hard and so tirelessly to rebuild themselves after conflict and after war. So, if this story has resonated with you, I would love for you to go and read my full article. As I mentioned, it's called Woven Hope, How Crafts Are Restoring Identity After ISIS. It's also available through the Arts for Refugees page and BizGs. Please do feel free to share it with people that might be interested, to talk about it, and also to share to support organisations that are helping women rebuild their lives after conflict. Again, this is a story of survival and it's a story of strength. So remember, when communities are rebuilding through culture, they're teaching the world how to heal. Thank you so much for listening.